5th, 2022. This is the school board workshop. Has the front lobby been cleared? Thank you. We'll be talking today, the subject of our workshop is the legislative agenda for this year, the 2023 legislative agenda. And the presenters today will be Dr. Denise Carlin. And I'll let you introduce the rest of your team.
All right, thank you, sir. Good afternoon, board members, Dr. Bernier and Mrs. Dupree-Bruno. It's our pleasure to be here with you today and to share the information, as chairpersons just talked about, relative to our legislative platform for 2023. We do have some guests with us today. They're going to be appearing via Zoom. They were unable to be here with us physically, and so I'm going to allow them, if we can pull them up on the screen, to introduce themselves. They are from Gray Robinson, so I'll turn it over to Kim and Robert to introduce themselves at this time.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Dr. Kim McDougall, Gray Robinson. Sorry, we tried to be there today, but we had some fog issues in Tallahassee. Otherwise, we would have been there in person. Looking forward to today's discussion. It was great seeing a lot of you guys last week in Tampa. Robert?
Yes, and good afternoon, everybody. Robert Stewart from Gray Robinson. I'm out of the Orlando office today, but located in Tallahassee, like Kim, whenever the legislature is in session and oftentimes when they're not. Thrilled to be with you and a chance to represent your great district and your great county and your students, and looking forward to working with all of you and being a part of this presentation today.
All right, thank you, Kim and Robert. And so to our board members, you have received in your backup materials a copy of the draft, and I want to emphasize draft, 2023 legislative priorities. As you know, we have been working closely with staff. We've met with board members. We've met with the superintendent, had multiple conversations about the draft priorities. And as you can see on your screen, as well as in your backup materials, there are basically 5 buckets of work. That is increased student achievement, safety, teacher certification and retention, school facilities utilization, and of course, in honor of our post-hurricane recovery efforts, we have 3 hurricane-related asks. So those are something new this year, but certainly very much needed. And so we have created on page 2 of the document, you'll see 3 asks relative to our recovery efforts. So before we turn it over to the superintendent for his comments and for your discussion, I do just want to extend a big thank you to our staff. Our executive team and staff have been working very diligently all throughout the fall on these priorities. They have helped to refine them. My conversation with them went like this: we have to make sure we have things in here that you need, and sometimes people come up and apologize. Oh, I have one more thing I want to. No apologies necessary. This is a very special year for us as a district. In so many ways, but certainly when it relates to our recovery efforts, and there's no ask that should go unnoticed. And so our staff has been abundantly honest. You all, when we've met with you individually, have been very honest with us. We appreciate that. And today we're here, Kim, Robert, and me, to answer questions you have and just to listen to your discussion. Again, it is in draft. If there's anything we need to add, we're very open to doing that as well. So at this time, I'd like to turn it over to Dr. Bernier for his comments and, of course, your discussion.
Thank you, Denise. Mr. Chair, board members, really no comments from my end other than to say thank you for all the help and effort that you put in, not only early on, but as the new board members came aboard, they were ready and available, and we really appreciate the additional input from all of you, because we wanted this platform specifically moving forward to represent the board as it's currently elected. So I'll leave it to the chair and your discussion.
Thank you. Mr. Fisher, do you have any?
Mr. Chair, I have no comment at this moment.
Mrs. Patrica?
I have no comment either at this point. Thanks.
Ms. Jordan?
I've already had a conversation this morning with Ms. Denise Carlin, Dr. Carlin, and I know that originally we had a legislative priority that we had worked with, so seeing that we have taken what we had prior and consolidating those two to be more firm and committed, I think it did work a lot better. Thank you for that.
Ms. Langford Fleming.
I have no comment. Thank you for all the hard work behind all this.
And Ms. Morgan.
I have no comment.
Okay. I do. I just came back from meeting a roundtable discussion with the House Majority Leader, Representative Grant, and the head of Commerce, which is Representative Rommel from Naples. They're very much aware of our needs. The roundtable was just simply to tell them our needs, not for any specific asks, because we have not approved any yet. But at that table, there were also people, the mayor of Cape Coral was there, some of the commissioners were there, so they seemed very sympathetic. But the one thing they did say is this is going to be a multi-year recovery. So asked for what we need, and I think we've done that here. I think it's a very good type thing. One thing that's in our legislative ask that I think is very good, and that they mentioned specifically, was labor force for the technology. Several of them there said they were having a very hard time finding plumbers, electricians, etc. And so that's going to be very important that we pursue that. We probably have the only governor in the United States that's pushing the fact that you don't have to go to college to be a success. So I think this is a very good legislative ask. Is there a motion? I'm sorry, no motion. Is everybody content with the legislative agenda? Denise, do you have anything else to add to that? Or?
I thank you very much, first of all, for all of your work and for your comments. The only other thing we wanted to share was just a little bit of information about next steps. So we know that there's going to be a special session. We know that committees are up and running. So I'm going to turn it over to my esteemed colleagues at Gray Robinson to share with you those next steps.
Robert?
Sure. No, happy to take the lead on that. And Dr. Carlin, thank you for your hard work, and Dr. Bernier and school board. Thanks for everything that you and your staff have done to kind of bring us to this point as we look ahead to the session. I think where I can maybe be of most value very quickly is to give you a sense of kind of what else is going on around our legislative agenda. So in any given legislative session, there's a host of issues that the legislature is going to have to deal with, not the least of which are our asks. And Lee County, not surprisingly, and it's been mentioned here today already, is in a very unique and important position coming into this legislative session that I think when you brought us on couldn't have been foreseen due to the impacts of the storm. And so we have kind of the standard legislative asks that we're going to look forward to that kind of fit into that education space. And then of quality and of taking care of our kids and doing the things that we always want to do as a school board and as a school district. But you also have the added challenge of the storm and the needs, the very real and present needs that you have coming out of that. But as we look ahead, organizational session was just a couple of weeks ago, right after the election and just before Thanksgiving holiday. The legislature is going to meet the week of December 12th, next week, for a special session focusing on property insurance, property tax issues coming out of the storm. They did a property insurance special session back following the regular session in the spring, but that, of course, needs to be readdressed, and they're going to handle some issues there. And then after that, we really kind of get right into the meat of the legislative year with committee weeks, one more in December, 3 in January, 3 in February, and before you know it, we're at the start of session in early March, and that will run, of course, 60 days through the first Friday in May. And so among the issues that the legislature, at least the leadership, has already talked about, obviously the property insurance and the property tax issues, you've heard both Speaker Paul Renner and Senate President Kathleen Passidomo talked about housing as a key issue that they want to see addressed this year. You're going to probably see some issues around tort reform. Those may be tied in with the property insurance issues, particularly around roofing, and those are issues that you're experiencing right there at home right now following the storm. And then a lot of focus, particularly in the House, on infrastructure. There's been a new committee created in the House specifically for infrastructure. So there'll be a kind of a heightened focus on that in the House. And in the Senate, one thing worth noting is the creation of a new committee called the Fiscal Policy Committee that's going to be chaired by Senator Travis Hudson out of Palm Coast. And that's a new committee that any legislation, any issues that have a financial tie to it, they won't only go through the Appropriations Committee and the Finance and Tax issue like they used to, committee like they used to. They'll also now be likely tagged Fiscal Policy Committee. So some of the priorities that we'll work on in partnership with you and your team may also fall into that category. So just something to be aware of. The last thing I'll mention, and I'll hand it over to Kim to add any comments that she might have, is the surplus. There will be another budget surplus this year. That surplus is obviously going to be impacted heavily by the storm, and there will be some backfilling of citizens that needs to be done. There'll be some significant dollars that goes into infrastructure rehab and hardening and resiliency and repairs from the storms that were. But even with that, the state is going to have a surplus, and so all things being equal, to be in the position that Lee County is in right now, needing to ask for some fairly significant funds, there certainly has been worse times to ask for that. And so we are standing ready and excited to get to work alongside you as we begin kind of the new legislative year in the coming weeks. That was a little long-winded. Obviously, happy to answer any questions that you've got, but let me hand it over to Kim to maybe talk more specifically about the education and the policy issues, which is really where her strikes lie.
Thanks, Robert. I just wanted to say, even though Robert and I are working for you, we're not waiting for session or committee meeting to start working for you. Chairpersons, Dr. Bernier and Denise and myself, we had a phone call with the governor's office because we're letting the governor's office know that these ideas are coming. These 3 issues are coming. The issues about the property tax, perhaps the interest on your loan that you may need to pay your bills, and then also about the limit of getting fast track and make procurement under current state laws even quicker, and making sure that all of your students have a great place to return even back to school as soon as possible. You guys did a phenomenal job. It was amazing what you did in the amount of time you had. So we have not waited. We're moving forward. And I think once you have your board meeting and you adopt it, now we're going to start. And for your CTE project, of course, in the legislature, it's a specific appropriation. So for Dr. Carlin, welcome to her new role, her new job of all the paperwork that goes along with legislative ask. And she's been fantastic working with all your staff, helping Robert and I get the information we need. So we're looking forward to continue to work with her. And again, thank you to each one of you for meeting individually with Robert and I, or meeting with me. That was a great asset to get going early and on, because you do have a big lift ahead. So we're both very thrilled to help you get everything you need to help your students.
Before we move on, yes, Patricia. Miss.
Thank you, Gray Robinson. I appreciate it. I'm really happy to have you on board. Is there any thought, has any thought been given to working with Collier and more specifically Charlotte and DeSoto on these hurricane asks? Do we have common needs? And is there any, will any good come out of, counties coming together to sort of show that advocacy in numbers?
I think the potential for synergy is always positive. We have not talked to them specifically about the 3 asks that we've taken directly to the governor's office, but I can assure you we'll be reaching out and making sure that if there is synergy, the greater number of folks, unfortunately, that need it because of the Hurricane Ian, that will be helpful. But right now, the 3 you have are very specific to the extent, I think, Lee County, bless your heart, the extent of damage you had was a lot. But we will reach out. And whenever you have an ally, it's a positive thing.
Right, and one more, if I may.
Yes.
I'm hoping that one of your strong talking points on the technical college ask is going to be the fact that we are now number 2 in the state of Florida for our technical colleges. I think that's a huge selling point. So that's it. Thank you.
Any other comments? Yes, Ms. Jordan.
Thank you. Kind of going along with what Ms. Patrick had said. So if you look at the teachers' certification and retention, they are all amendments now. So that's changed from what our original one was for the last 4 years. And that, again, which I had spoken with Dr. Carlin, that right there would also be another thing that would work with the statewide as well, going forward. Because it affects all of us in the state, as far as our teachers are concerned. And then also with and I guess, Dr. Carlin, if you could maybe share with the increase in, because some of these things have changed, the titles have changed from the original. So the increase in student achievement is now the career and tech education went into that, and workforce development did, and what was the other one that had gone into that we pulled in?
I think we also looked at the section on school facilities utilization, increase in cost per student station. I think there had been a couple
that's right.
around that one as well that we condensed and consolidated into one ask.
Okay, and then safety was the next one, and then the second one on that request is for the eval, which doesn't state that, but.
Yes. So we left it open for safety and security technology. As you know, that's a very sensitive issue. We want to be sensitive to the things we say in public about what we put into our schools relative to safety and security. So there will be a more specific ask when we complete our one-pager and when we meet with our legislative delegation and others.
Okay.
So,
Well,
trying to be sensitive about what we put in public about the technologies.
well, and that technology would not hurt us at all with the public knowing that, if we were doing that. That's not something, because that's very visible that they would see.
Yep.
And we just had actually a class on that at the conference of what you can say and what you shouldn't say.
Exactly right,
So
yes.
this is something that you're able to say.
Absolutely, and that's why we left it with safety and security technology.
Okay, great. And then the school facility and utilization, we pulled in I'm just trying to put together what we had prior to what we have now. So early learning is now put into the school facility and utilization.
That's correct, yes.
That's been put into that.
Yes.
And then comprehension health, which I know was one that was part of our priorities for, I know the past 4 years, is now incorporated into the increased student achievement.
Right, the increase in per student funding, we're asking for a significant jump of over $400. And so we're going to fold in opportunities to fund experienced teacher salaries, programs and services for children to include that, as well as our cybersecurity threat mitigation services. So
Great.
folding that all into one ask.
Thank you.
Yes, ma'am.
Thank you, Chair.
Any other questions? I would just like to say that, again, thank you for putting this all together. We are not the only area of the state impacted. Sometimes we forget that because we were so severely impacted. But the other coast has had 2 hurricanes, so we're going to be going a little bit head to head with them for funds. But I think this is a very good ask. Okay, seeing no more questions, let's move on to Board Attorney Evaluation Instrument. Presenting that is Dr. Savage.
Good afternoon, Chairman Persons, distinguished board members, Dr. Bernier, Attorney Dupuy Bruno. Today's presentation is the second part of the work to revise the assessment instrument used to evaluate our general counsel school board attorney. This is just a reminder of our board attorney's annual evaluation cycle. And I want to zoom in on the last elements in this process, though, and work backwards to begin with the end in mind. So these are the more specific milestone dates that are coming up in the new year. As we move to adopt a new instrument, we want to be sure to finalize soon. My intent is to complete the first draft of an instrument before you leave for winter break. That way we can finalize a tool in January. Now, for that to take place in today's session, I'm going to be looking for as much clarity as possible in terms of what you like and don't like about the samples that we go through today. My goal is certainly to have an instrument finished by January, but absolutely February would be at the latest. But ideally, January would be desired. That would give your board attorney ample time to thoroughly prepare her self-evaluation before you are given that information on March 1st. So I would also say your continued feedback, not just today, but as we go, is very much desired to move us expeditiously through this process. At the last board workshop, the big objective was actually to finalize the interim evaluation, and we were able to do that. However, I also very briefly introduced these samples and provided those to the board. We didn't get into any specific detail, so for the 3 new board members, there's plenty of opportunity for you to select an evaluation instrument you feel comfortable with. And here are the samples for a deeper look today. I also have all the specific instruments pulled up here on the computer so we can actually review any of those tools in deeper detail. What I'd like to do is quickly highlight some of the strengths of each sample as well as some of the issues perceived with those instruments. But then we'd have general comments or discussion. I would ask that we have that at the end. My hope today is to try and narrow down to no more than 2 instruments that you feel are the most compatible for this governance team. If there is one that you clearly like and it becomes evident is clearly liked beyond the others, then that's fantastic. However, once we do get it narrowed down to 1 or 2 instruments, then the next piece I would ask is that we be specific about what you don't like about that instrument as well. Or if there are very specific aspects of the other instruments that you would like to see embedded together. The more specific you can be on that, the greater the likelihood that the first draft will represent your wishes. Visually and stylistically, I'm going to make sure it looks and feels very comparable with our current superintendent's evaluation, as well as the district color and style formatting. So we really want to focus more on the substantive aspects of these evaluation instruments. So my intention is to share a little bit more of a reaction to these tools today, and then gather individual feedback from you both now today in this meeting as well as ongoing. Then I will take all your comments and have produced that initial first draft for the group to react to. So before I move forward, how does that sound today as a plan for today?
I think it's a very good plan. Continue.
Thank you very much, Chairman. So I'll start, I'm not going to go into any significant detail with this, but we do have a current school district instrument. It is in your board protocol manual, and it is the instrument that we have used historically. There have been some concerns with this instrument, but it's important that you have access to this instrument so at least you can see what has been done in years past. You can also use it to compare to the superintendent, so you can see just they have some similarities but some very significant differences. Rather than going over the current instrument, I'm going to focus on the other instruments. The first one that I went over, it was just the Miami-Dade School Board Attorney. Now, this is an extremely detailed evaluation, very comprehensive. With 61 indicators, each one receives a rating. And while that could be considered a strength, it could also potentially present a challenge because with that level of specificity, you as a board member may not necessarily feel that you have the direct knowledge to produce a rating for the school board attorney for each indicator. A measurement system is always better when the person rating has a great deal of confidence in the rating they are selecting. If they're unsure, that can increase the variance in scoring, can make it less objective for the person being rated. Even putting a not enough information rating doesn't necessarily help in cases like this because it can overemphasize the scores of those who do rate. So the point is that the more ratings don't necessarily result in a better evaluation unless the person rating has all the requisite information to rate with confidence. Another strength of this instrument, though, are the client feedback forms and how they're used to add to the evaluation. The biggest challenge that I see with this particular instrument is that it does not assess the parliamentary role in any way, nor does it capture working with a governing board and the unique aspects of having 7 individual clients while navigating those individual interests, again, against the prevailing collective responsibility to the board. However, from an evaluation of legal performance, as well as legal office management, this evaluation is certainly robust. For the Brevard General Counsel model, this is probably the most balanced in terms of the board function, the parliamentary function, and the legal services. Interestingly, this model was actually borrowed by our prior chief of staff attorney who had modified this to fit his position at the time. Now, while this model only has 28 indicators, they do cover the range of competencies needed for both a board attorney as well as a general counsel. If there is a limitation to this particular role, this instrument, I would say it's the specific legal role, such as being contrasted with the Miami-Dade model, is just one of the 5 areas to be assessed. Now, that isn't necessarily a bad thing, but it is worth noting because accurate and knowledgeable legal guidance is a core function of this role for the district. While the Brevard model currently also weighs all 5 standards equally, that's something that could easily be adapted if the board felt that one particular standard should be weighted more heavily than the others. But that could be applied to any of these instruments that we go through. As far as the Clay County School Board Attorney, it does a fine job of articulating the many components of a school board attorney in the legal responsibilities, the board working relationship, communication, organization, and personal qualities. There's a blend of both the quantitative and the qualitative, but it does not attempt to pull all the ratings together in any particular manner. This isn't necessarily a bad or good thing either, but our board policy does have some specific requirements as it pertains to ratings and dropping the lowest and the highest of each one that makes this instrument. We'd have to adapt it if this were to be one that you particularly liked. As for the concerns I have with this instrument, the instrument is significantly lacking as it pertains to the general counsel side of our role here in Lee County. There is very little that can be construed to evaluate the management of all the legal services staff and leading and managing the legal work for the district. Furthermore, from a measurement standpoint, the 9-point ratings for each indicator would not be advisable. Best practices relating to an objective level of measurement would suggest that any rating beyond 5 points will increase the subjectivity of the rating, particularly when there is no rubric to assist this type of rating scale. As I also mentioned, there is no method in this instrument to pull the ratings together to produce a rating label of any kind, which is inconsistent with our board policy. The next instrument is the Pinellas School Board Attorney model. This Pinellas instrument it does focus on both the board attorney and the general counsel duties. So it takes a unique approach in that while there are 48 specific indicators, none of those specific indicators receive a rating. Instead, the board members generate a holistic score for each of the 7 standards. So the 7 standards have anywhere from 5 to 9 indicators, and they're clustered within that standard. And they could be interpreted more as a bulleted description of the standard, but ultimately it would be the board members' individual discretion as to how they arrive at the rating for each standard, since there is no individual rating. So for example, how would a board member consider if one indicator is clearly present whereas another indicator is not present at all? How would you reconcile that in the rating? All of that would essentially be the judgment of the person rating how they want to address that disparity in indicators within the same standard. Additionally, most of the ratings that you'll read are fairly generalized statements, but then some are also very specific to the district, in this case Pinellas, and they aren't necessarily, they can't be taken verbatim because we'd have to transfer them. So, for example, indicator 4.8 in Pinellas references a very specific newsletter, and indicator 3.4 references a Pinellas Monitoring Advisory Committee that we don't have in Lee County. So those are just a few examples of how it would have to be modified if we were to look more deeply at the Pinellas one. The last one that I wanted to go over was just the Alachua School Board Attorney. This is a totally different type of approach because it's basically an entirely qualitative assessment. It does generate a rating at the end, but there's no quantitative rating process aside from that. It's very straightforward. board, but very different stylistically. So in this particular case, this essentially puts the onus on individual board members to qualify any aspect of the board attorney's performance, but provides very little support in terms of what should be considered. Certainly, we could provide some type of information to assist the board members in terms of consideration if this was a direction that the board wanted to go. But this is certainly the simplest of the tools that we have. So that was my quick version. Of course, you have access to all these tools. I can pull any of the tools up today, but I wanted to make sure that I did go through and at least give you some broad reactions to some of those issues. So with that said, I wanted to turn things over to Superintendent Bernier and to the board for your discussion.
All right, Superintendent. Mr. Bennett.
At this point, Mr. Chair, I would have no comment. This is specifically to the evaluation of your board attorney. It would be a relationship between the members of the board and general counsel.
Board members, do you have any questions for Dr. Savage? Yes,
Well,
Ms. Morgan.
Don't have questions, I have comments.
That's just as good.
Okay. I liked the Miami-Dade, but not for the board attorney, but for the ABAs, because we don't have the ability to measure their work, but the board attorney should have that ability, and so I would recommend that instrument be used for the ABAs. I liked the Brevard instrument, but I would add Section 1, research analysis judgment from Miami-Dade, and I would add Section 6, client feedback from Miami-Dade to Brevard. And I think that would create a fairly comprehensive instrument for the board to use. So those are my initial comments anyway. I'd like to hear what others have to say.
Any other comments? I also like the Brevard with some tweaking, and I think maybe that's the direction that I would be most comfortable with. I was not thinking about the ADA, Mrs. Morgan, but I think you probably have a very good point there, because Miami was definitely too detailed for us to do for the board attorney. So that's all the comments I have. Yes, Ms. Prekin.
So I really liked Miami-Dade as well. I do think that the larger the number of indicators we have, the less personality is involved in an evaluation. It really forces us to be objective and evaluate based only on objective criteria. So whether you like someone or don't like someone doesn't matter if you are honest in the evaluation. So that was one of the reasons why I liked Miami a lot. I think we could go through Miami and remove the things that we cannot evaluate because we don't have access to that information. And the other piece is, it is the responsibility of the individual being evaluated to provide artifacts to support each indicator that is being evaluated. So it's really not just on us, it is also on the individual being evaluated. I really liked the board relations part of the Brevard evaluation. I do think that would be, I'm hearing the direction so far of the two people that spoke before me. I could live with Brevard with perhaps a little bit more detail and a few more indicators. Clay County, I thought, was lacked adverbs. So, for example, informs the board of pertinent changes in state and federal law, advises board on impact of impending legislation. Timely informs the board, right? Like the fact that we're informed 3 months late, they've still met the indicator, but not in a way that would be appropriate. Pinellas, again, too few adverbs, and I didn't like the fact that it was a he. Alachua, I did not like at all. And then just in general, whatever tool we decide, I would like to talk about having an indicator surrounding contracts and approval as to form and content. This is something the board discussed many years ago, and we did include it in the job description, but it is not included in the current evaluation. It says approval as to form and content when appropriate. The form piece of it is making sure that we have all of the appropriate paragraphs in a contract. The content piece of it is making sure that that the contract really embodies the deal between the parties. So I'm going to go back to Bonita Springs High School, which I know is a nightmare for many of us who were here at the time. Bonita Springs High School was a guaranteed maximum price contract, and there was no price in the contract. So how do we, as a board, approve a guaranteed maximum price contract with no price? I would think it would be on the attorney to tell us, yes, all of the paragraphs are here, but the content is not because there is no price. So that's what I would be looking for in addition to any evaluation that we use. Those are my comments right now. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other?
I do.
Mr. Fisher, and then Ms. Langford Fleming.
Sorry, it's still trouble seeing this light in this. For me, the attorney in me loves the Miami-Dade one, but the board member does not like it. It is too many indicators. I agree with that with everyone. It would be too complex, I think. Where for me, Alachua is out too. It's too simplistic, I would argue, for that. Pinellas, actually, I like some of the categories and a few of the questions, but it's too subjective. So that would be out for me, maybe take a little bit from it. I would also be leaning more towards Brevard with that, and perhaps, like others said, take out some of the, a little bit from Miami-Dade. Clay County, I wasn't that impressed with either, but that's my thoughts on that at the moment. Thank you.
Ms. Fleming?
So yeah, I think I am more impressed with the Brevard County one when it comes to the subject that we are talking about. I did like your point earlier. I like that it has number 5, school board relations, and that it seems to be, and Dr. Savage, correct me if I'm wrong, but this seems to be something that's ongoing, continuous, something you build on throughout the term rather than just a one and done. Is that correct? Can you clarify?
Yes, we have the opportunity to enhance these forms as often as you'd like. We don't typically like to do it right before we use the form. The way it's built into the cycle is that really after you implement, then we would do it really in the summer months, so that there's ample time. It's kind of like if you're playing a sport, you don't give a person the rule book right before you play the game and then move the goalpost. It's very important and fair to employees in the HR side and everywhere else to give them as much clear notice and clear direction. This is how you're going to be evaluated, so they can plan and schedule the work accordingly. But every instrument we do has to have the ability to be updated. For example, superintendents, the whole second section of his evaluation was his entry plan. Certainly, he won't be doing his entry plan next year, so we'll have to update that and revisit it on an annual basis to get that information in there. But other aspects of it are meant to be longer lasting, so it's really a mix of those things. And again, at the pleasure of the board, whatever you all as a governance team feel comfortable with, we can make that we can amend accordingly.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, just to add, it didn't seem too excessive. The Miami-Dade had how many indicators? A lot.
71, I believe.
So, yes, and so I just think it's more clear and it's pretty detailed. So that's all I have.
Thank you. Dr. Savage, did you have anything else you would like to add?
So just for clarity purposes here, what I heard was Brevard seems like a very solid starting place, but I heard we could pull in specific language from Pinellas, specific language from Miami-Dade. I have some very specific examples I took down and wrote. I think that can allow me to produce an initial first draft. When you get this draft before the break, I just encourage you to beat it up. It will not hurt my feelings. So if there's more aspects you'd like to see included, the goal is to get to the finish line. So I want to get you a good draft to react to. I think I have a lot to work with today. This is excellent. I think I feel very confident how to move forward with the feedback of the board today.
I feel you grasped it perfectly. Thank you.
Thank you.
May I?
Oh, sorry.
Thank you. And I as well like the Brevard, but I also have to agree with, we need to make sure that what's on the contract is on the evaluation as well. So, because I think that was the problem with the first one, there were some items that were in Mr. Bruno's contract, but was not on here or vice versa. So we need to make sure that what we're asking for does match the contract. Just as Ms. Patrica had said, about having numbers and not having numbers and agreeing upon it. But I also think that we all like this too, because it's more palatable. We like the colors of it, so it's more attractive to us. Just saying. You with your eyes first. You with your eyes first.
Mrs. Patrica.
So if there were specific indicators in evaluations other than Brevard that I would like to see included, or you would like to see included, or you would like, can we email them to?
That would be very helpful, especially any instruments that weren't included today. Like Ms. Patrica, you mentioned earlier about the contracts and form to legal sufficiency. I think if you had something that was an exemplar that I could borrow as a starting point, that's fantastic.
Mr. Chairman, if I may?
Yes.
I know that this is the board's evaluation tool. Just a couple of things for my clarity and concerns based on the prior evaluation, and one of the issues that we had was with regards to points that board members were not aware of. For example, in Miami-Dade, under subsection 1, it says, identifies, interviews, and prepares witnesses, including expert testimony. So I'm not sure how the board would actually be aware of that. In addition, it's not something that I do. It depends on what type of case it is. So those are the kind of things that I would like to be, make sure it's mindful as well. And I agree, thank you, Ms. Jordan, for bringing that up, that we take a look at the contract, because the contract has specific languages in terms of what my responsibility is in terms of contracts and what needs to be included in those types of things. So I think that's a very, very good point. Thank you, Ms. Jordan, for that.
I'm sure we will be looking at it closely and not putting in anything there that you, maybe you are doing on a regular basis, but definitely that we're not aware that you're doing, because that would not be fair for you or even us. Okay, any other discussion on this? Thank you, Dr. Savage.
Thank you very much.
The next item on our workshop is the review of the agenda for tomorrow's action meeting.
Mr. Chair, thank you very much for the opportunity. We did receive some questions regarding the review for December 6th, which is tomorrow. These questions were logged in by board members. The first question revolves around the consent agenda item under academic services, H4, which is the approval of an intensive after-school and weekend academies grant. The questions were surrounded whether this was a new grant or a new program, and maybe it would be easier to tell what schools are going to be impacted. So let me begin with, this is a new grant. This is a new opportunity for us to apply for additional support for both intensive after-school and weekend academies for our elementary school students. We have 49 elementary schools, so those are the 49 schools being impacted. So I wanted to be sure that we were aware and had that information. Any more questions about that particular grant item? The second item then is H6, approval of a change in the Cambridge Assessment and Education Contract from a site-based letter of agreement to a district-based letter of agreement. So why was the reason for the change and what are the benefits? Cambridge is moving all of their existing school districts to their new U.S. district-based letter of agreement. In the past, all of our schools received an individual letter to sign by the principal, and that is no longer the way Cambridge is currently doing business. Cambridge has requested the districts, all districts, update their contractual language, and the benefit is the district becomes the central point of contact for all legal agreements and is no longer the responsibility placed on the individual site or the individual principal. So the staff here at the central office who has the time to deal with a contractual issue has that time versus putting the undue burden on our principals and our school staff. Any questions to the Cambridge agreement? Next item is under business services, I2, approval of the expenditure for ITB, invitation to bid, number B207388JA, cafeteria kitchenwares and equipment. I think there was some confusion in these questions regarding cafeteria versus cafaretta. So this recommendation is to fund next year's regular recurring contract costs for all schools to obtain materials to prepare and serve meals. If they need a pan, if they need an oven, it doesn't matter if it's Hector Caffaretta or Lehigh Senior High. This is a contractual bid for all kitchenwares and equipment, and since these expenses are unrelated to Hurricane Ian, no cost for reimbursement would be requested through FEMA. This is just the cost of continuing to make sure that our kitchens have what they need in order to continue to support student meals. Any questions? Seeing none. J2 is the next item, again off the consent agenda for Human Resources, approval of the 23-24 medical plans, rates, and contributions. Can you talk about the increase, and can we provide a quick explanation to the public? Yes, we can. Like all other medical plans, the district plans are subject to what's referred to as medical trend. That's a nice way of saying medical inflation. Medical costs continue to rise on an annual basis. For instance, the trend was 7.2% in 2021 and 7.7% in 2022. So approximately $11.5 million is to cover the increase of the cost of insurance so that employees then do not have to increase their out-of-pocket premiums. So again, medical trend drives the cost of inflated medical costs. We set aside $11.5 million to help cover those so our employees did not have to pay out of their pocket. The remaining funding, approximately $5 million, was to reduce the out-of-pocket cost for employees' pay for dependent premiums. That is the agreement we have in principle that will be coming before you tomorrow night, which should and will lower the cost upon approval of what a family pays for insurance in the school district of Lee County. Seeing no questions. Consent agenda item information systems, approval of K2, approval of the contract with CenturyLink Systems Solutions. This is a solution that we need to put in place to help support Sanibel's reopening. Since this cost is a direct result of damages from Hurricane Ian, we do believe the claim is eligible for reimbursement from FEMA. Keep in mind, is eligible for reimbursement and FEMA actually reimbursing are two very different things, but we are working with Imperium and all of these areas to ensure that we have all of our I's dotted and T's crossed, and you will have a presentation tomorrow afternoon from Imperium as well. Any question on CenturyLink? Consent for operations, letter L, L1 and L2. L1 was the approval for the final payment for Cape Coral Technical College, IAQ HVAC upgrade project for bid N187349AT. And then L.2, approval of the final payment project, the final project payment for the RFQ CQ20-0034TA HVAC renovation for Fort Myers High School. And L3, approval of the final payment for Fort Myers Middle Academy School lighting retrofit replacement project for bid number N177302D as in dog, G as in Gordon. There was a question from a board member about final payment. I too thought that this was a change, but I went back and researched two very specifically. I printed hours for December 6th regarding L1, final payment for Cape Coral Technical College, and I went back to November 17th of 2020 before my arrival, and it has the same language. This particular item says the approval of final payment for LT 20-06 Trafalgar Middle School install sidewalk canopies. So it has been used in the past that when we are making final payments that we identify that so that the board and the public would know that the final payment has been made and you should not see any additional payments coming back before the board. It's just an item language that tries to inform everyone that this is it. Once we pay this particular bill, then we have satisfied the requirements of the contract. No other questions? There was questions on L7 and L8. Approval to increase expenditures for RFP number Region 4 Education Service Center, Omnia Partners 20-04 HVAC equipment installation services and related parts. I'd like to take these in that order because the answers are slightly different from each other and it will help the public, I believe, as well. Item number L7, the renewal was taken to in front of the board in April of 22, which contained anticipated expenditures for the fiscal year 23 scholastic year. After receiving the approved budget funding for fiscal year 23 and obtaining the estimates received from the contractors on needed and final determined projects, it was determined that the remaining expenditure needed to be increased in order to capture the remaining and approved projects, as well as the day-to-day expenses that may arise from storm repairs and unforeseen equipment breakdowns. There are currently 4 vendors on this piggyback bid. The local vendors in our area include Dalkin Applied Americas Inc. and Carroll Air Systems Inc. Both of these vendors are being utilized for projects. What this means is, at the time that it was requested in April, there was an expected budgetary expenditure for fiscal year 23. After receiving that approved budget funding, what happened was the board then also approved all of the contracts and all of the projects to occur during that year. Then that item goes out for additional budgetary estimates. Those estimates have returned higher. As we know, the same is impacting our capital outlay regarding the cost of doing business and the cost of construction. That's the reason for the existing and the ask for the increase specifically for that HVAC equipment, installation, service, and related parts. Seeing no questions, I'll go on to L.8, approval to increase the expenditures for the service agreement with the School District of Lee County HVAC single source vendors. There are currently 14 vendors on the single source agreement. The firms offer services related to HVAC, energy management controls, intercom parts, cooling tower chemicals, electric panel breakers, etc. The reasons these vendors are utilized is due to them being single source vendors that provide specific and proprietary services or replacement equipment for the district. Former or returning board members will be aware that sometimes when you're dealing with a piece of carrier equipment, you must use an approved carrier vendor to reinstall carrier parts so as not to violate a warranty. That's just one example of how, in some cases, convoluted this process could be, rather than using just a generalized AC tech who could come in and maybe do that work if the product was not under warranty. So I wanted to be reminded of that. Additionally, there's an increase needed to due to unforeseen repairs that were needed, most of those having to do with Hurricane Ian. For example, there were 2 sites that had broken chilled water lines and required water flushing and application of new chemicals to maintain clean water throughout the system. So those were things that going into the school year we did not expect to have to expend, but we had. Other sites have experienced failed controllers for HVAC systems, and now they require upgrades, and depending on whether we're still under warranty or not, it goes back to that specific vendor idea again as well. As for reimbursement from FEMA, we still need to undergo a review process by FEMA. It's too early to confirm that they will actually be reimbursed, but those ones that are impacted from Hurricane Ian will be submitted for FEMA reimbursement. Two more. L12, approval of the final payment for quadruple A, former K and former NN pre-K to 8 school in the South Zone early steel package project. The questions revolved around providing total cost for the South Zone project. Will this truly be the final payment? What is the plan for the 2 properties that we currently own in that area? And we know what is now the plan for 3 Oaks. So we continue to always pull data and verify, but yes, this will be the final payment. Currently, there are no plans for the properties that we're going to house quadruple A. There's certainly no plans within the current 5- and 10-year capital plans. There have been some inquiries from local governments related to these properties and the potential of selling them, but those negotiations, or those conversations would be a better term, scratch negotiations. Those conversations were interrupted by Hurricane Ian and need to be rescheduled. People are interested in 2 properties that we own, one over by Estero High School, the other being off of 3 Oaks on one side and I-75 being on the other, almost directly across from the Hertz Stadium, so on the other side of I-75. So we are, there are no plans for the property in the next 10 years, but at this time the recommendation remains that we hold on to these vacant parcels in order to accommodate any future school sites amid the ever-shrinking availability of vacant parcels. It's getting more and more difficult to procure land in the Fort Myers area. For instance, there's those two pieces of property we own adjacent to Estero High School. If we were to expand Estero ever in the future, really the only place to go would be to the north into the student parking lot. In that case, we would need those parcels potentially to increase or to provide for student parking at that location. So we are always open to looking at what property is worth and what the value is and whether we plan to use it, but we want to be cognizant of both the 5- and 10-year plan and making sure that we don't see any increases to enrollment that would require us to expand to utilize those properties. In other words, the real estate isn't going anywhere. It's an investment on our behalf. I don't know that we should stay into property that we don't need for long haul, but for right now, until we can settle some of the other issues related to our capital costs, I think we should hold on to those properties, but we will continue to revamp those conversations with the local government entity that was interested in those pieces of property. Any questions on what was once quadruple A? We did receive, if I may, Mr. Chair, we did receive a constituent email regarding the steel that is housed at Canal. I have checked with both our internal facilities and construction people, our gentleman who's been helping us out with facilities and construction as we've moved through this process, Mr. Wagner, and they will be reaching out to a content expert on steel. While the steel may have become rusty, the steel is not rusted. There's a huge difference. That steel can still be cleaned up, painted, and utilized. That steel has not, as we saw in an email earlier this weekend, you may have seen, that steel has not gone bad. In fact, we may potentially be using it for a project coming in the near future. So I wanted you to be aware. L16 is the last one, if there are no other questions on that item. Approval of a piggyback for Alachua County Public Schools ITB number 20-43, HVAC filtration services. Why did this not go out for an RFP? What was the last contracted HVAC amount for the last contract, and who were those vendors? The piggyback offers the lowest cost AC filter replacement services. It gives them 1 unit price, which means it includes the filter, the installation service, and the disposal of the previous filter. So it's a piggyback bid, which in a sense, when you hire this individual, they do all 3 things. They bring the new filter, they install the new filter, they take the old one away, all for that particular cost. This option is most cost-effective option for the district, and the firm has a local Fort Myers office. As to the last contracted HV air amount for the last contract, I will get that to you in a board update. I do not have that information at this time. For the new board members, these answers will go into a board update. I will get them to you. Normally we do that on a Friday. I'll ask staff to make sure we get that in a board update for you this evening so that you have them to review as you're reviewing the items for tomorrow night. If you have any questions, Mr. Chair or board members, I stand at the ready.
Any questions?
I have none.
Have none?
I have none.
We have none. Is there any good of the order for today? Then meeting, oh yes. Well, I see those hands way down there.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I just want to, because I did hear some concerns with regards to ensuring that specifically price is included in our contracts, and I wanted to alleviate some of those concerns. The GMP issue that happened at Bonita Springs High School was prior to my tenure. When I did arrive, that was something that was brought to my attention. So that is something that legal is very careful with to ensure that there's price in every contract. In addition to the credit of construction, the director of construction specifically, there's a new way that we bring some of these construction projects to the board. So we'll have a one-on-one to explain that, to make sure that the board understands how this happens and that you're comfortable that these types of errors do not happen. Since my tenure, there has not been a contract that has come before the board without price.
Thank you.
Just a couple items, Mr. Chair, if I may. Just a couple items, Mr. Chair, if I may. First and foremost, would like to thank the board and the staff who got us all to safely to Tampa and back. Really enjoyed the opportunity for the Florida School Boards Association Conference and the ability to be with all of you and interact. I'm glad everybody got both there safely and home safely. I'd like to just remind the community that may be watching, and we'll say this again tomorrow night, congratulations to Dunbar High School for such a amazingly successful season. I'm sorry that they came up, a few points short on Friday night, but a really great opportunity. We are still working through the boil water alert for Fort Myers. I'd like to congratulate my chief of staff and team. Unfortunately, we're getting better at this every time we have one. We were good at Cape Coral. Hurricane Ian taught us a lot about moving water around, and so when we talked yesterday afternoon, it was almost like a small walk in the park, but it's not. It's a Herculean effort to secure the water, get it distributed. We have enough water for today and tomorrow. There's ongoing conversations and open lines of communication between the school district and the city. As soon as we know that the water main's been repaired and the additional testing's been complete, we expect the boil water to be removed, and we'll continue to work through that issue. And finally, just a reminder to the community who may be watching, there is a town hall this evening out in Fort Myers Beach for us to do a little bit of more interaction with the community and answer some additional questions prior to our board meeting tomorrow night and our work session coming up on December 13th. That's it from me, Mr. Chair. I appreciate it.
Thank you. Meeting adjourned.